Thank you everyone for introducing yourself. I recognize that I didn't say where I work at Pima Community College. I work in the Center for International Education and Global Engagement, and it is a joy for me to partner and collaborate with Student Life and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and our student leaders. So first, I just want to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Advocacy 101. Taking action to strengthen our society. We recognize that during this pandemic, there has been a lot of struggle and strife and pain and violence. And we wanted to provide an opportunity to bring our Tucson and Pima community together. So I'm gonna pass it off to Anna, who's gonna share a little bit more about our intended learning outcomes and the structure for today.
Thank you, Dr. Daisy. So what we want you to gain from this webinar is to interact with PCC peers who share similar advocacy interests, engage more in advocacy initiatives, and also learn about activist efforts in Tucson. So in this webinar, we'll focus on the importance and relevance of advocacy right now, how to engage in community conversation, and most important, how do I advocate? What can I do now?
Thanks so much, Anna. Once again, my name is Bea. So as Dr. Daisy mentioned, the impetus for this event was student-driven and kind of came from wanting to create a space and an event where they could share resources and begin conversations at Pima to address the current climate. It can be really difficult sometimes when you know there's a lot of things happening in the world around you and you don't necessarily see that reflected in the institutions that you're a part of. So we're really super happy to do this. As most of us are likely aware, since the killing of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter movement has been really reactivated. It was originally started in 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri, when everything was happening around Michael Brown. And it's been really active again. There's been a lot of protesting. There's been a lot of demands being made. There's been a lot of conversation about police brutality, what police abolition could look like, and education around abolition practices and the need for abolition. We're also, at the same time, dealing with COVID-19, which has thrown our world into a whirlwind, as we all know, which is why we're online right now. But one of the other things that has unfortunately happened has been the rise of anti-Asian sentiment and hate crimes committed towards the Asian community. As we know, the president of this country has called the virus the China virus and other very derogatory and incorrect terms, which has really sparked a lot of violence towards the community. If you look, there has been especially cases on the rise in California. At the same time, we're also waiting to see what's going to happen with DACA, which, if you all aren't aware, DACA stands for Deferred Action for Children Arrivals. And DACA is an immigration status that allows individuals who are brought to the United States without documentation by their parents to be able to remain in the country legally and be able to access things like education and jobs. The decision has been up and kind of like in the air for the last while. The last thing that we heard was that President Trump and his administration said that he will allow people who have already been recipients of DACA to renew their DACA for only 1 year, when typically it was renewable for 2 years, and that they will not be accepting new applications. This obviously creates a lot of strife and creates a lot of anxiety for a lot of people, and is something that we're dealing with at the same time that we're dealing with everything else. Before we go on, is there any other sort of like social climate things that anyone else wanted to bring up? There's been a lot of, as I mentioned, the protests have kind of grown from centering on Black Lives Matter to also extending into the idea of police brutality, which is concurrent and connected to Black Lives Matter. And we've seen it here in Tucson with multiple organizations centering Black youth, organizing events and organizing protests. I don't know if anyone else wanted to mention anything else before we move on. Okay, I think we're pretty good then. Next slide. Okay, so for this first part, we're going to have you all broken up into different breakout rooms so that you all can kind of get to know one another and begin the conversation. We want this event to be a learning experience, but also interactive. A big part of wanting to put on this event is to create that community here in Pima within the students and the staff as well. So we're gonna have everyone break out into different rooms, and we'll have you all take turns to talk about the following three questions. Sorry, I was looking at here. So the first question is, what are your current concerns related to advocacy, social issues, etc.? What have you noticed in Tucson, and what actions do you believe need to be taken? So this should all, how long are we giving each breakout? Do you remember? I don't have it pulled up.
15 minutes.
15 minutes, okay, so that should allow everyone to kind of like have a little bit of a conversation. Just keep an eye on the clock when you're in your group to know that 15 minutes is when we're gonna have the breakout rooms disappear, and we'll all come back into the central room again. So once again, the questions are, what are your current concerns? What have you noticed in Tucson, and what actions need to be taken? So I think if we're okay, Jennifer, you can go ahead and begin the breakout rooms.
Also, I typed the questions in the chat, so don't worry about trying to memorize what the 3 questions were. They're in the chat.
So you should automatically be sent to your breakout room, but in case you're not, there should be a pop-up that says join, X breakout room. So be sure to click on that, and they're set so that you will automatically be rerouted back to the main conversation after 15 minutes. All right. All right, sending you all off to your breakout rooms.
Awesome. So I think everyone's filing back in. Dr. Daisy, do you want to share your screen again so we can see our presentation? There's T. What's up? I see your camera now.
So before we move on, Bea, can you just lead us in a really brief discussion about our conversation in the community rooms?
Yes, totally. So I can share a little bit about what was mentioned in my breakout session. We spoke a lot about Black Lives Matters, the need for further education so that people really understand what Black Lives Matter is. We contextualized Black Lives Matter and also sort of like social disparities within the borderlands that we live in, living so close to the border. We spoke about the abuse of power by our current administration when it comes to immigration and the dealing of immigrant youth and family separations. We also spoke about capitalism and how that plays out in inequities, both nationally and internationally. And we spoke about the need for unifying the Tucson diverse community in a way that makes sense and that can help us actually move social issues forward in a collective manner, seeing as we're such a diverse community. And if anyone from my breakout room, did I forget anything else? I think someone's saying that they could have used more time. Our group was really good about our time. We have like a minute left at the end. So yeah, that was our conversation. I don't know if anyone else wanted to share. Ilda also said not enough time in the breakout rooms. So
yeah, we didn't have enough time either. I think you all met before this because that was a long list that you went through.
Yeah, we went through it.
All right, so can we just hear from one or two other rooms? Just what was your conversation like before we move on?
Yeah, in our room, we kind of talked about how some of our concerns are there doesn't seem to be very clearly articulated or advocated pushes for like a specific change. Like there's a lot of protests, which is good. There's a lot of building awareness, but it seems there's very little instances where these movements are actually, articulating and identifying, this is what we want changed, this is how we want to change, this is the time frame we want to change, all that stuff. And one of the places we had seen it done was in Colorado, but it was only like on a city basis. Like the city of Denver had enacted legislation that cut police funds and held police officers that were guilty of misconduct financially responsible and dug into their pension funds if there was a civil suit. And it doesn't seem like there's enough of that type of legislation happening, especially in response to like police brutality and like the different protests that are happening.
Thank you, Josh. And I think there was maybe one or two other rooms. If anyone wants to just share briefly what your conversation was like.
Yeah, I would love to do that. So basically in my breakout room, like people are sharing about the social disconnection and like people are basically afraid about what's going on in the future, and which I think is part of my, like I do have that concern about it, and like we share a lot of that.
Thank you. And I can't see your name. Is it Ken?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I prefer to go by Ken.
Okay, thank you, Ken. All right, someone from my group. If we can hear from you, that would be great.
So I'll go. So what we talked about in our group was some of the concerns with like the climate, the violence with George Floyd, being very aware of like how a lot of people are starting to become aware of what's going on, just dealing with COVID-19. And one of the big themes would be the last thing that we spoke about is like sustaining, because I like how, I think it's Teresa, correct? Or T, I can't really see your full name, but she was like, yeah, how do we sustain? Because it's not like we haven't, like we just started dealing with this, like we've been dealing with this for a long time. So how do we sustain and how do we move forward and not get burnt out with that, as well as how do you de-escalate when you're in a moment of like a hatred act or something, and you know your life is on the line. You just don't know. And the last thing is like, how do we move people from not being scared to speak up and to protect somebody else, regardless of their culture? You know, a lot of people are so scared, but it's like we need to speak up. If something, it's not going to change unless we speak up. So.
Thank you, Shakisha. So we're going to turn it over now to Jennifer. Thank you all for participating in the community conversations. And I just want you to keep in mind some of the concerns voiced as we move into breakout rooms later. So thank you.
Thank you, Daisy. So when we were planning this event, we talked about, okay, so we might be talking about larger systemic issues, but really the place we tend to be able to have the most impact is in our local community. So trying to kind of keep the conversation focused on what can we do for our community. And we put together a list of a few things that you can do here locally in the Tucson, Pima County area, which is email your local and nationally elected officials. So whether that's the mayor, your state representatives or senators, or our nationally elected or U.S. senators, U.S. representatives, things like that. We can support Black-owned businesses here in the Tucson area, and I know Ashley's going to talk a little bit more about that later. Sign petitions. If something's important to you, sign a petition. Make sure it shows up on the ballot. Even if you're not sure you fully support it, go ahead and sign the petition. You can learn more about it before you vote on it. But the petition allows it to get on the ballot for all of us to vote. Give visibility to informative posts on social media. And obviously you want to make sure that that's factual before you share it and not just something sensational. Donate to Black and LGBTQ plus organizations. Listen and share podcasts. Educate yourself, and there's a couple of links that we included here for advocatesforyouth.org and transstudents.org. They have some great information and some great graphics that you can actually share via social media. So taking kind of those national issues, but giving that impact here locally. So I am going to bring it over to Ilda to introduce our local community members that are serving on a panel for us today.
Okay, so I will let this screen stay up for the moment, but then as we switch over to our panel, Jennifer, if we could go ahead and take it down so we can see them, our full screen as they do their presentations. So I'm really excited to moderate or facilitate this panel of 3 brilliant and beautiful local community activists here in Tucson. T. Loving is somebody that's new for me, but I know the other 2 panelists pretty well over the last couple of years that I've been here in Tucson. And I know that, you know, they do such great work, all 3 of them that are doing great work here in the Tucson area. So as we invited them to be part of this panel, they all agreed to be with us to share their experiences with activism. And we asked them to first introduce just a little bit about the advocacy work that they're doing, and then how their path, I guess, into that work. So that's going to be what they're talking to you about a little at the beginning, introducing what they've been doing. And then we will look at some of the chat questions. So if you have questions for this panel, please put them into the chat. I will work through those and ask those questions after they do a little bit of an introduction. And we have about 30 minutes for this panel, and then we'll go into breakout rooms. So let me introduce our wonderful panelists. First, I'll introduce all 3, and then we'll start with the first person I introduced. So we have 3 panelists. Ashley Larussa, she and her pronouns, founded Rue Events in 2019. It is an event management company with primary focus on supporting the growth of organizations and community leaders that foster equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. And from following her social media, I know that she's really focused in on centering Black voices in our community of late. So she'll be talking a little bit about that. Next on our panel, we have T. Loving. They use they and them pronouns. T. Loving is a maker of mischief, mistakes, and magic. They've been a church historian, sex worker, multidisciplinary performance artist, director of harm reduction and social programming and other things, many other things. Their work holds people at the center, investigates how memory and language live in and erupt from our bodies, and works towards unraveling false narratives. And then third on our panel, we have Dr. Matt Matera. He is an educator, uses he and him pronouns, organizer, activist, and scholar. He spent the last 15 years creating new ways to make education accessible to students with undocumented status. Matt worked closely with immigrant youth and educator activists to found Scholarships A to Z in 2009, and then the University of Arizona's Immigrant Student Resource Center in 2016. Both the organization and ISRC center the voices and needs of those who are directly impacted by immigration policies. Matt finished his doctorate in higher education from the U of A in 2019, and his dissertation focused on the importance of developing networks of transformative resistance in order to make education accessible for undocumented populations. So again, amazing panelists, happy to have them with. So I'll go ahead and we can start with Ashley, if you can tell us about your work.
Yes, firstly, thank you so much for the invitation and opportunity to speak today, especially virtually in this new world of Zoom. So thank you all. Just speaking a bit about the work I do, again with the Business RU events, I'm focused in collaboration, working with community leaders and organizations on their actionable things they can do towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. It started off with events, working with nonprofit organizations, especially for their fundraisers. After attending a number of nonprofit fundraising events, not seeing much representation of other cultures or individuals in the room and space, I felt it would be a wonderful opportunity to work with these leaders and being able to locate and invite, because I was tired of hearing, oh, we just don't know anyone, or no one's here, and then going into different spaces and going, oh yes, we are here, so why aren't we invited? So that's where the work was really starting to grow in 2019. Here now in 2020, I did a very hard pivot due to COVID-19. I've been in home here for about 130 plus days since March, and I really wanted to still be involved with the community. So I focused more on consultation and started the project Blacks Friday. Hashtag Blacks Friday started as a hashtag. And back in 2019, one of our co-creators started to hashtag Blacks Friday to pull away from the negative tone that you hear whenever someone brings up Black Friday and seeing the mayhem at these corporate run stores and multi-million-dollar organizations. So we thought, why not bring a positive tone back to Blacks Friday and instead use the hashtag to promote your business, promote anything that you're doing, services you're offering, or new goods to be sold. This went into more of a forefront project when we found ourselves all at home at the same time and not being able to frequent these businesses out in person. And so we decided to start a website and an app, and then following up with a live event where we were able to have a pitch competition. So these Black businesses had 1 minute to be able to tell the community about their service or their goods, and a way spotlighting these business owners as well. What's also behind this project is recognition. I really feel here locally that Black and those who identify with being Black or African American tend to fall into this lumped category of minority or POCs when they definitely identify as Black. And so we definitely wanted to have an opportunity to spotlight them, to showcase what they're doing and recognize that they're not being ignored. In doing that, we found over 300 businesses here. And definitely in Tucson, the community came out and they supported and they continue to shop at these businesses and patronize. And so that's what we're doing now in our resiliency plan. We're continuing to encourage to shop at Black-owned businesses. If anyone's ever asking you why, just say because it's time. And if they still have a confused look on their face, you know, point to a library or a couple of books and suggestion and resources. So again, I'm very blessed and happy to be here with you today and be able to speak about advocacy, especially with our Black-owned businesses locally. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. And today, I don't know if you can see this, I'm sporting my Tucson Together, which has Root events on it right there. One of the advocacy pieces, you know, that's happening in our community is businesses being supported through different fundraising efforts. Okay, so next I will go to T. Loving. If you could please share some information with us, T.
Awesome. Hi, everybody, and thanks for being here. My name is T. My pronouns are they, them. When I really think about it, so, you know, people go, how did you start doing this thing? And you're like, I don't know, let me think. And so as I was really thinking about it, I'm pretty sure my trajectory into advocacy and activism began as a kitchen table activist, right? I grew up in a really religious family. So it was really pretty impossible to step into someone's home, to be engaged in a conversation, to share space with anyone without always hearing, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? We're all created equal. Do not judge lest ye be judged. And while this was sown into me, it was very clear when we were sitting around the kitchen table having these conversations that these religious sentiments, these texts, right, were really being silently contextualized in a way that said, do unto others that you deem worthy, right, that fall into these very specific spaces. So do unto them as you would do unto yourself. And growing up as you know, a Black, Indigenous, queer, non-binary person who didn't always know where I fit and clearly had some connections into community that was like, oh, hey, come on, you belong to us. One of the things that continually was continually made clear to me is that I was always going to be somebody's unworthy. So I came into activism not as a means of like changing the world per se. It really sort of found me because I was interested in and needed to find a way to be able to shift my being from simply being alive to a place of living fully, deeply, wholly. Simultaneously, it was also very clear to me that other identities, groups of people, and actions were not. And while I didn't have the language at the time to call it normative, I was really aware that there seemed to be this sort of like global cool kids power group. And basically folks like me, right? And folks who had issues or problems didn't belong to that group. So having a chance at living meant not only just being seen and heard on the surface, it really meant being honored in the fullness of myself. So meaning that the world, systems, that those actions that are enacted, quote unquote, in support of me or to recognize me should be fully ethical and supportive to me as a human, no matter where I've been or done at the moment. And it should not take into account, right, or center itself on what's being stigmatized or criminalized at the moment. So I kind of just sort of fell into it, which seems to be the way that a lot of my life happens. I'm like, oh, this looks like a thing. This looks like a place I fit. While there are issues that I don't necessarily focus on in terms of my activism or advocacy work, those that I most often find myself drawn to or primarily center myself in are those impacting self and my connected communities. So some examples are, you know, decriminalization of drug use and sex work, centering and uplifting BIPOC, queer, trans, gender non-conforming individuals' equity and care, Indigenous sovereignty and acknowledgement and care of those systems, Right now, I'm pretty heavily involved with a lot of the Black Lives Matter work that is happening in Tucson. I do not say that to identify myself as someone who is in the organization Black Lives Matter. I want to make it very clear. I am not saying that, but that this issue is very near and dear to me. And this didn't become an issue that was near and dear to me 2 months ago or 2 years ago. This has been my center for as long as I can remember, as sort of described. I use the term Black Lives Matter now because I think it is something that we more globally can recognize and understand sort of the dearth, right? The wealth and depth of what is included in that topic. As I was speaking on things for myself and community, and while I hadn't, when I first started, even claimed artistry as a space that I knew or wanted to be a part of or thought that I even belonged in, it just kind of always happened that every time I had something to say, every time I wanted to do something, I was like, a song would be appropriate here. How about we make this graphic? Just try to stop me from performing is basically what I'm saying. And so a lot of my advocacy and activism work, although I have, worked in organizations, so I've done, campaigning and letter writing, and, I've, talked to the politicians. I've actually wrote policy in organizations. But at the core of that, every day, a lot of my output really is active advocacy and activism that is art-based. I think in part because it allows me to hold on to the details. As a Black Indigenous person who's queer, non-binary, right, all these things, I oftentimes feel like the details are all that I truly own in this world. Art allows me to use my tongue, culture, and myself in my own way. So, my art advocacy and activism rolls out inside of theater spaces, across the internet, but it also just happens on the street. Sometimes it's planned, sometimes it's not. And sometimes it is, paired with street-based action. And sometimes it's just happening down the street from that thing. So that's a little bit about me and what I do.
Thank you so much for that, T. So as we move over, and so many questions for all of you already, but I'm going to move over to Matt. And as we do that, Dr. Matera, I invite everyone here to be, thinking about questions. Please type them into the chat, and we'll work through those as well during our panel. So now I'll turn it over to Matt. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Matt Matera. I use he, him, his pronouns. I do have a PhD, but Matt is fine to call me by. Also, it's a real honor to learn and work with you all in this panel, both Ashley and T. Thank you so much. And thank you to the folks who put this together. I know these things require a lot of work, especially online. So thanks for all that energy. And a shout out to the students who brought this to life, because I think in all of my work as an educator, the main lesson I've always learned is to just stop talking as a teacher and to listen to our youth and listen to students. And that often we may think as teachers that we know better, but sometimes we just have to get out of the way and make sure that they have space and to fall back so we can learn from them. So I, again, really honored to be here. I think, my kind of thinking about my introduction, and it's been a really interesting moment for me. So my activism work, so I will just say, so I'm a white cishet US citizen living in a middle class moment in my life, not always, but currently right now, fortunate to do that. And with these very privileged identities, I think about where did activism work actually start? And I will just say that if we were having a conversation, gosh, maybe 20 years ago, 21 years ago, perhaps, you would be talking to someone who was thinking that affirmative action was problematic, but not problematic because it benefits overwhelmingly white women, but problematic because it was unfair, right? You would be talking to someone who's like, yeah, I see issues of race, but I don't know what they are. I don't have that terminology. And so fast forward many, like 2 decades, and I think about a journey, that there really is no one moment that I've started activism work, but this journey to understand what is it to be an ally, how do you get that term, what is it to be an advocate versus a co-conspirator versus an activist in this work. And so it's messy. And so I think of these things as a spectrum. So I'll talk about that a little later in the breakout rooms, but I'm on that spectrum all the time because I am someone who is trying to figure out where does my things like white guilt end and my activism actually go? Where is it that I continue to stay in the work because it's a privilege to take a break in the work of social justice as someone who's a white man, if we're talking about race, especially if we're talking about anti-Black racism. But so we'll talk about a spectrum, right? And I think we're on that spectrum, especially as folks who are white. And so for me, one of the reasons I was asked to be on the panel was to talk about my work with populations that have undocumented immigration status. And so I'll kind of pivot there for a second and think about that. In around 2005, 2006, I was actually working at Pima. And that was a time where Proposition 300 was passed by a very racist state, racist nativist state here in the state of Arizona, that decided that if you were undocumented, you could not get something like in-state tuition at public colleges and universities. And that to me at that time felt super problematic. And it wasn't in a way where I was like, I have to take down this system, this is an intentional thing. It was more of like, what is happening? How do we make these decisions to kick out certain populations of students? And that moment really launched me into this specific pathway I've been on to really focus on efforts that ensure that students with undocumented immigration status have access to education. And so from 2006 to 2009, there was lots of different behind the scenes work happening with students and trying to figure out the best strategies and how we create systems that are better and that replaced the systemic oppression happening, especially towards undocumented populations. And in 2009, a group of students and some other educator activists and I created Scholarships AZ, which became part of the solution in our eyes of how we address the limited access to higher education for undocumented populations. So over that time, again, being on this spectrum, being someone who is not undocumented or formerly undocumented, I had the real privilege of being pushed and challenged and taught by students with undocumented status along the way to really inform me of the ways that I would either step out too much or move out too much rather, and the ways that I needed to move back. And so what I have done and continue to do in the last 10 years of being part of that organization was to unlearn and to continue to unlearn the process of what it is to work in an organization, what it is to work for collective liberation, which means that it's never me at the forefront, but it's me side by side. And it's me to supporting those who are directly impacted by these horribly oppressive policies and systems in which we uphold otherwise. And so in these last 10 years and recently within the last few weeks, I've actually stepped down from my work within Scholarships AZ because they're on an exciting new journey as an organization. But I've learned a lot, and I really am grateful to the undocumented youth and the families who pushed me in that way. And I will just say, as someone with so many different privilege identities, that's often where I sit, is in this reflection of who are the folks that have taken a chance to push me, and when I've listened, because it's hard to listen. Those are the biggest moments of learning and understanding these ideas of even allyship or advocacy or co-conspirator identities. And so why I stay involved with these issues is because I have to end things that are like anti-Black racism, to end things like white supremacy. It is the responsibility of white folks like myself to understand we uphold it otherwise. And so we have to actively work on ourselves and our own folks who look like us, and be part of the movements to dismantle these systems of oppression. And so why I get involved is because we have to for our own survival. So thanks again for the opportunity to be on the panel.
Wow, thank you to all three of you. do students or others in our webinar today have some questions that they would like to ask? Please type them into the chat. I'll keep an eye on that. But until maybe some questions come in, you know, you've talked a lot. It's similar work, I guess, not around the same issues, but for all of you, your passion for the work that you do. And one of the ideas that kind of stands out to me is that around allyship. And, you know, sometimes we are active in different issues because of our personal identity. You know, you all talked about that piece, and sometimes, you know, we step back and hope that others will take up that voice. So maybe from each of you, from your different perspectives, how do you either work with allies to help be a more effective voice for community, or give voice to people from the community that you're advocating for? So if you can maybe think about that question for a second. Matt, you're on the front of my screen, so I'll go ahead and let you maybe say a little bit about that first, and then we'll go to the others. Does that question make sense?
I think so. I think I'm gonna defer for a moment to my colleagues on the panel as well. I struggle as someone who strives to be an ally to actually define and say, I'm an ally, because I think that's always problematic. When we give ourselves our own terminology, it's kind of like wearing a safety pin, which if you remember that movement, that was a joke. But I want to just, if it's okay, Ashley and T, I would defer to you to answer that, not to put that labor on you, but I would kind of come back to me if that's okay.
Yes, Ashley or T, would you like to think about that? How do you work with others to be more effective voices for the issues, community pieces that you're trying to work on?
Yes, I'll speak to firstly my background, which is in theater arts. So I learned through arts and creativity, telling a story, being impactful to the audience that's watching it, and then choosing what type of stories are being told. So in that collaboration effort, working with those who aren't necessarily identifying as you are, but being able to open up your mind and scope to their point of view and their perspective. I find that also now currently in the consultation I do. And when I'm working with individuals on different levels, we talk about privilege, we talk about power, guilt, fragility, and how that is navigating your choices through this system, which we are all a part of. And so I find really being able to be heard and hear as well and listen on the other end is beneficial when I'm working with what I consider as allies. For those that I identify with, which are Black individuals and women and business owners and queer folks. I really love being an advocate and making sure if I'm the one in the room and something's being said, because they may look at me and see me in a certain social construct. You know, they see me as a married Black woman and they may assume I'm heterosexual and not queer. And so they'll say things, and I love checking left and right and making sure proper pronouns are being used and making sure that they know it's not a preference, but an orientation. And things like that, just being able to break the silence and speak up.
Thank you for that. T, would you like to add to some of that?
You know, I guess one of the first things that I'll say is, and I really appreciate you sort of like naming this out loud, Matt. So in the work that I do, regardless of where I'm doing it, one thing that's always very clear to me for self is I can't walk into a room and be like, hey y'all, I'm your ally, right? Ally isn't a thing that I get to tell you I have somehow become. Ally is a privilege and a gift that you are given from doing the work, right? Alongside folks in the ways that you have been asked to do the work. And I say that because one of the things that I feel like I'm oftentimes having conversations in community and my work and things that I do in places and spaces, people are like, but I'm an ally, so I'm going to take this action. And I'm like, okay, so number one, like that's really not what allies say. You don't decide what it is that you're going to do and will benefit, right, a group that you are serving in connection and collaboration with. So when I think about ally, again, it's really, one, a privilege to be such. It is something that one cannot just simply claim and write it on their name tag. It is the name tag that you're given, right, from folks who are inside of whatever group it is that you say you're allying to and or with, who say, I see you, you're here, you're showing up in this space and you're with us. I feel like, often another place that oftentimes like this idea of allyship, a lot of conversation that I'm often engaged in is folks will be like, well, I want to be an ally, but I really need for someone to tell me how to do this thing. And I'm like, so you want the people who are already doing the labor of just basically, I don't know, trying to live, to now engage in very deep level education to make sure you can take this journey, right, with them. So I always feel this need to talk about like an ally's role. One of the ways that I walk into spaces and I go, oh, that's an ally, is not just because like that person showed up and said, I'm here. It's that person who may come with perhaps, not all the what we might consider like the best or most supportive ideas or the most deep understandings, but they've come having done some of the work, and which shows that, right, they're willing and ready to engage in cultivating their own knowledge and not relying on the labor of whomever's impacted, affected, to carry them through the journey, which just really seems like antithetical, right? So just a few thoughts there.
Thank you so much for that. Absolutely. I think that really helps set, some understanding around what it means, to work towards allyship. That I feel like you're never, completely there. We might be, really close to a community and speaking for a community, but always thinking about that community, especially when we might not have a seat at that table and somebody else might have a seat at that table that can represent the community. We have like a couple of minutes left in this session, and people will have an opportunity to spend a little more time with you all. So as we're thinking about that, one of the questions that came in from a student, and any one of y'all can answer this, is around, I think, trying to be an ally. So do you have any experience, or can you share with people how you support somebody who might be under verbal attack? That, have you ever stepped in? I think for some of us, we're a little more seasoned. We've been out there a little bit longer and can feel a little more comfortable sometimes stepping in or calling things out. I think, Ashley, you talked about calling out. What advice might you give to somebody who hasn't as much experience in doing that, in helping to act like an ally and be in support of somebody who might be attacked in an aggressive or microaggressive way?
I would recommend going directly to the individual that's being attacked and talking with them. Are you okay? You want to leave? Totally disregarding the negativity. I see that negative people and those who spread hate, they tend to feed off of attention. And so when you cut off the attention, and especially in blocking and talking to someone that's being attacked, they tend to kind of burn their own fuse out. Again, that's verbal attacks. When it comes to physical, then each case is its own case of self-defense, obviously. But verbally, definitely being able to just step in and making a verbal, this is rude, this isn't right, again, to the person that's being attacked, and ignoring the attacker would be a suggestion.
Thank you for that. I have one of our participants raise their hand. Clinton, would you like to ask a question?
I had it organized all in my head and I already lost it listening. Part of it has to do with that there's two types of attackers in this sense. You got one that are out for malicious, and others that have a misplaced viewpoint, that don't understand the true issues, and they're trying to express around that. And sometimes they can have their opinions changed, but you're right, when it's a direct attack, it's hard to change that opinion right then and there. It's best to do it as you suggested. I appreciate that input.
Can you say, is that a question that you have for folks? Would you like to kind of maybe say a little more about that?
It wasn't so much a question, but because I have spoken up before, and there's some people that they're there, as T had mentioned, that they're there to have a scene. Whereas other cases, you can make a change in the perceptions that the people have. And I have spoken up there and got clue real quick that they weren't there to have their mind changed. They're there to have a scene, have their way expressed, and that's all it's going to be about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Clinton. Okay, so I want us to have enough time in our breakout sessions, so I'm going to go ahead and move us in that direction. Thank you all for your words of wisdom and power, and for sharing your experiences with us. I know those that jump into your sessions will just really enjoy continuing to talk to you. So thank you for being with us, and I'll turn it back over to Jennifer to move us into our next part of this webinar. Thanks, everybody.
I think we probably could have had the panel for the whole time and still run over. So we're going to make a slight adjustment. We were planning for 30-minute breakout sessions, which was what we had you pre-register for. But we're going to adjust that, and we're going to do about 18 to 20 minutes, just so that we're still not running too far over our 3:30 end time. We hope you can stay with us if we do happen to run over. But we're going to break out into those 4 different topics. And again, we're sorry you can't attend more than one. We just had a limited time available today. But we do have a folder where we will share any handouts or any thing that has been shared in any of those breakout sessions. And I'm doing a running list of all the different websites and stuff for you. So I'll share that link before we end today as well. So I'm going to send you off into your breakout rooms. If anybody has any questions, you can message me privately, but your presenter should be taking care of you pretty well. So we're going to head off to those breakout rooms.
So we're back. Is Daisy in the room? Daisy, are you?
I am. This is something that I'm not going to talk a great deal about because I want to be respectful of folks' time. But we will share this. We'll share the PowerPoint. So this is just, I think, really good introspection to think about how do we address white supremacy, and then there's different components of that. So you'll have a chance to look at this later. So I want to just quickly share this quotation. It's by Grace Lee Boggs. She was a civil rights activist, and I really love this because it's just a reminder of our role in society. She says, "You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it." So I really hope that today everyone had an opportunity to think about what is your role and what is your responsibility. And I know I really enjoyed the community conversation that we had, and we probably could have continued talking for at least another hour. I really appreciate the way that T asked us questions and shared perspective and also validated what we said. And I think sometimes we don't receive that validation, so it's important that we give that to others as well. So I'm gonna pass this on to Ilda and Bea. They're gonna wrap us up and just share a couple resources.
Yeah, thank you so much. I can go real quick and just share some resources. So as we had mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, transstudent.org is actually the Trans Student Educational Resources is what they're actually called. And they have really amazing graphics kind of talking about the intersection, right? So like where two social issues meet. And so they talk about the intersections of things like immigration and LGBTQ identity, homelessness, houselessness, and LGBTQ identity, youth, with LGBTQ identities, educational disparities also experienced by youth within the community. Advocates for Youth is an amazing youth and youth-led organization based out of New York that creates different graphics and creates different resources for educating on a lot of different diverse social issues and social injustices. So when, we spent a lot of time in this conversation talking about sourcing your information and where you source them. These are two great places to start. And I'm gonna share my screen real quick to pull up and share an amazing resource that one of our student leaders, Anna, created. Let me see real quick if I can do this. Boom. So this is the Google folder that Jen shared with everyone. And Anna made some amazing handouts for us that include accounts to follow on the three, primary web platforms or social media platforms being Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So these are amazing accounts that you can follow and keep up to date with. And she did a great job of putting national accounts in the top and then local resources in the bottom. So as you can see here, you have the National Black Lives Matters, you have Somos Poder Latinx, which does a lot of advocacy at the intersections of social justice, immigration, and many other issues. You have here Tucson Youth Coalition, you have the local chapter also of Black Lives Matter, and you have Puente AZ, which focuses on immigrant rights and immigrant issues, and they're based out of Phoenix. Then you'll also be able to see the different Instagram accounts. So some of them are similar. You also have this page called So You Want to Talk About, and that has resources on how to continue conversations and how to begin conversations. You also got the Daily Show there, which will give you a good dose of humor as well as like kind of dark humor around our social condition right now, but a great page to follow as well. And then this is the Twitter page. So different people to Twitter, to follow on Twitter, like America Ferreira, who is a Latinx director and producer and has produced several different shows. Also ACLU is on here, local chapter from Arizona, and Lucha AZ, which has a chapter here in Tucson, does a lot of advocacy work with youth organizing and also like voter registration, voter rights, and getting involved in voting. So please be sure to check out this folder. It also has the other page with the websites that we shared during the presentation. It's linked in our chat, but it will also be emailed out to everyone else. So thank you again, Anna, for creating those handouts for everyone. Ilda, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I'll just close us off with saying thank you so much. It's important to express gratitude in the work that we do, to practice some self-care in all of this. And I wanted to just encourage you to keep this conversation going. Think about the ways in which you can be engaged in our community, for our community. My dog is distracting me. He has decided to come and stand right next to me right now and maybe feels, some of the emotion of being here with you today, and how wonderful it is to see all of your beautiful faces and to think about the work that we can engage in. We're going to have some sessions coming up over the next semester and year that I hope to see a lot of you in, as we think more about our active work in our community, how we become more engaged in activism and more engaged you know, just with each other around some of these topics. Daisy and I are working on a couple of things related to conversations on race. With Bea and Jennifer, we're working on our justice advocacy, diversity, and is it equity? JADE program.
Empowerment.
Empowerment, yes,
Empowerment.
Thank you, Bea. Empowerment seminar that we've, you know, many of you have participated with us in the past around that work. And so we look forward to keep seeing you on here and staying engaged with this work. And I just want to close out with the very top of Congressman and civil rights activist John Lewis. You know, he wrote a letter in the New York Times after that was posted after his death. And it's so important and relevant to everything that we're doing right now. And he says, though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. You know, he was so heartened to see all of the action that was going on in the last few months, so many of us coming together and the diversity of voices in our activist work. And so I'm heartened to see all of you here and the diversity of just representation here in our Zoom. And so I'm really excited for the work that we can do together. Thank you for spending your Friday afternoon with us.
Thank you all. Enjoy your weekend. Stay safe and stay connected with us and all of the events we'll have coming up.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.